Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. If this is your first time, let me give you a quick rundown on what we're all about. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we build fun and inexpensive focused commander decks. A focused commander deck is more tuned than a casual deck, but not quite to the level of a competitive or optimized deck. Today's episode is going to be a special one though, where we exclude the cost of the commander. With just a $25 budget, it's pretty much impossible to build around some commanders unless we do so. Sometimes you get lucky and open up a commander in a pack, or you could just trade for them if you really want to build around them. So our budget is still going to be $25, but again, that's $25 for just 99 cards because we're excluding the cost of that commander. And prices on this show are powered by our sponsor, TCGPLAYER. Before we get started today though, make sure you go check out our new classic pink playmat and Commander's Quarters t-shirts on thecommandersquarters.com. And thank you to everyone who's already purchased our merchandise, it really does help support the channel. Also, make sure that you subscribe to the channel and click that little bell notification icon so that you can stay up to date in the latest Commander's Quarters episodes. Today's commander is Yuriko the Tiger Shadow. Yuriko is a 1/3 human ninja that costs 1 blue-black. It has Commander Ninjutsu for a blue and a black. That means by paying a blue and a black, you can return an unblocked attacker you control back to your hand to put this card onto the battlefield from either your hand or the command zone tapped and attacking. And it also has, whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. Each opponent loses life equal to that card's converted mana cost. This is a very unique commander and actually one of the very few that can get around commander tax. And its trigger can be absolutely backbreaking since it makes all of our opponents lose life. So what's our strategy with this deck? Well, we want to get evasive creatures out onto the board and then set the top of our library. In order to take advantage of our commander's ninjutsu ability, we need one of our creatures to get through. And if we can get a card with a high converted mana cost on top of our library, we can make sure that we get the most out of each attack. So how do we win with this deck? Well, we're going to ninjutsu our ninjas in and then drain out our opponents. The more ninjas that connect, the more triggers we're going to get and the faster that we're going to win. As with all Commander's Quarters decks, I'm going to break this deck down into 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how you're going to win with it. So let's go on to our first tactic. Tactic number 1, Cold Steel. First up, we're going to be running Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to search our library for basic land and put into play tapped. Next up, we're going to be running Prismatic Lens and Mind Stone, both of which tap for a colorless. On top of that, Prismatic Lens can filter our mana, and we can pay 1 and tap and sacrifice Mind Stone to draw a card. And then there's Fear of the Suns, which enters the battlefield tapped with 3 charge counters on it, and we can tap it to remove a charge counter from it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Next, there's Star Compass, which also enters the battlefield tapped. It can tap for either of our colors depending on our land situation. And by paying 1 and tapping Dimir Signet, we can add blue-black to our mana pool. Finally, there's Seer's Lantern, which does cost 3 and only taps for a colorless, but we can pay 2 to tap it and scry 1. Again, this deck depends on manipulating the top of our library to make sure that we're draining our opponents for as much as we can. Although this mana rock is nowhere near as efficient as our others, it has a great amount of utility to it. But again, in order to take advantage of our ninjutsu abilities, we need to make sure that we have creatures that aren't being blocked. So let's go through some of the best ones now in tactic number 2, Unstoppable. First up, we're going to be running Mistcloaked Herald, Dual Lurker, Triton Shore Stalker, and Slitherblade, each of which can't be blocked. These cards are perfect turn 1 plays, and they give us the best chance of getting our commander out on turn 2. And then there's Tormented Soul, which can't block and can't be blocked. This is a very aggressive deck, so generally we don't really care about it not being able to block, we just want to swing with it. Next up is Dimir Infiltrator, which also can't be blocked, but on top of that it has Transmute for 1 blue-black. So by discarding it, we can search our library for a card that has a converted mana cost of 2, reveal it, and put it into our hand. This is a very flexible card that can help us out in a variety of situations. It can even go get us Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitive, which is one of the best cards in this deck. It says creatures you control with power or toughness 1 or less can't be blocked. So not only is Tetsuko unblockable, but it makes some of our ninjas unblockable too, including our commander. This can have an extremely devastating effect on our opponents and help us close out the game quicker. Now there are only so many cheap unblockable creatures, but there are plenty of other ones that have other great forms of evasion. So let's go through some of them now in tactic number 3, Flappy Bird. First up, there's Ornithopter, which is a 0/2 with flying that costs 0. The fact that it has 0 power is irrelevant because we just need to get through, we don't actually need to do damage. So this is a fantastic creature that we can drop right away for nothing. And then we're going to be running some other cheap artifact creatures with evasion with Roterothopter, Signal Pest, and Hope of Ghirapur. Roterothopter is basically an Ornithopter that costs 1. Signal Pest has Battle Cry, so when it attacks, all of our other attacking creatures are going to get +1/+0 until the end of the turn. And we can sacrifice Hope of Ghirapur to make it so that until our next turn, target player who has dealt combat damage by Hope of Ghirapur this turn can't cast non-creature spells. Now again, all those little pieces of added value are nice, but they're really in the deck because they're cheap and they have evasion. And these artifact creatures are especially good because they don't require any fixing. Next up, we've got some 1/1 flyers for just a blue with Fairy Miscreant, Jace's Phantasm, and Hypnotic Siren. Jace's Phantasm does get +4/+4 as long as an opponent has 10 or more cards in his or her graveyard, and Hypnotic Siren can be used to gain control of a creature. And then we're going to be running Artificer's Assistant, which does double duty for this deck. It's a 1/1 with flying, but it has whenever you cast a Soric spell, scry 1. So not only can this creature get through our opponent's defenses, but it can also set up the top of our library. And finally, there's Wingcrafter, which has Soul Bond, and as long as it's paired with another creature, both of those creatures have flying. So this is actually another great way for us to give either our commander or one of our other ninjas evasion. But we're not quite done with our evasive creatures, so let's go on to some more that have some extra utility in tactic number 4, who goes there. First up, we've got Sage Owl and Spire Owl, both of which do the exact same thing. Not only are they 1/1s with flying, but when they enter the battlefield, we get to look at the top 4 cards of our library and then put them back in any order. So not only do these cards have evasion, but they can also help us set up the top of our library. And then there's Augury Owl, which can help us in a similar way. It's a 1/1 with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, we get to scry 3. This card can be even more helpful though, because it can help us get rid of any dead cards on top of our library. And finally, we're going to be running Night Veil Sprite, which has flying, and when it attacks, we get to surveil 1. Again, all these creatures are great at helping us get through and then set up the top of our library. The bigger the converted mana cost of the spell that sits on top, the more life our opponents are going to lose when our ninjas hit. But who are these other ninjas outside of our commander? Let's go through them now in tactic number 5, Living Weapons. First up, there's Moth Dust Changeling, which is technically a ninja because it has Changeling. It also has tap an untapped creature you control. Moth Dust Changeling gains flying until the end of the turn. A ninja that can have evasion is a very deadly combination in this deck. Next up, we've got some actual ninjas with Mistblade Shinobi, Walker of Secret Ways, and Ninja of the Deep Hours. Mistblade Shinobi has ninjutsu for a blue, and when it deals combat damage to a player, we can return target creature that player controls back to their hand. Walker of Secret Ways has ninjutsu for 1 and a blue, and it has whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we can look at their hand. On top of that, we can pay 1 and a blue to return target ninja we control back to its owner's hand, but we can only activate that ability during our turn. Being able to return ninjas back to our hand can be very important for this deck. Again, most of our ninjas don't have any built-in evasion, so we depend on their ninjutsu to get them through. And then Ninja of the Deep Hours has ninjutsu for 1 and a blue, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we can draw a card. All of these additional effects are great, but the best part about them is that they're ninjas, so they trigger our commander. The more ninjas that we can hit with, the more life that we drain from our opponents. So we're also going to be running Skull Snatcher, which has ninjutsu for a black, and when it deals combat damage to a player, we can exile up to 2 target cards from that player's graveyard. Next is Akiba Gang Shinobi, which has ninjutsu for 3 and a black, and when it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards 2 cards. And finally, we're going to be running Silent Blade Oni, which has ninjutsu for 4 blue black, and when it deals combat damage to a player, we can look at that player's hand and cast a non-land card in it without paying its mana cost. 6 is a lot to pay for ninjutsu, but this effect can be game winning. Now, unfortunately, there aren't too many ninjas in Magic, and there are even less that are budget. So let's make sure that we have some ways to find them and some other pieces in tactic number 6, Hide and Seek. First up, we're going to be running Diabolic Tutor and Razaketh Right, both of which let us search our library for any card and put it into our hand, then shuffle our library. On top of that, we can cycle Razaketh Right, which can come in handy. These cards are great at helping us find the perfect card for our situation, whether that's a ninja or something else. But then we're going to be running some more specific tutors with Perplex and Brain Spoil. We can cast Perplex to counter target spell unless its controller discards his or her hand, or we can transmute it. When we transmute it for 1 blue black, we can discard that card and then search our library for a card with a converted mana cost of 3 and put it into our hand. And then Brain Spoil says destroy target creature that isn't enchanted, it can't be regenerated, and it also has transmute for 1 black black. Now both of these cards have very specific targets that we're pretty much going to get every single time. So let's go through those cards now and see why they're so good in this deck in tactic number 7, Ninja School. First up is going to be the golden pick of this deck, which is the number 1 card out of our 99. And the golden pick for this deck is going to be Arcane Adaptation. Arcane Adaptation is an enchantment that costs 2 and a blue, and it says when it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control are the chosen type in addition to their other types. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So when this comes into play, we're going to choose Ninja so that every single one of our creatures is going to be a ninja in addition to its other types. So that means that every single one of our creatures can now trigger our commander's ability. So all those cheap, small, evasive creatures are going to be better ninjas than our actual ninjas. Even with just a few creatures in play and this on the board, we can end the game very quickly. And that's what makes this card the golden pig of the deck. But there's also another enchantment that's very similar with Xenograph. It costs 4 and a blue, and when it enters the battlefield, we choose a creature type, and each creature we control is the chosen type in addition to its other types. So this is pretty much the exact same thing as Arcane Adaptation, but it costs us 2 more. Again, this effect is so powerful in this deck though that we'll take it at any cost, because once all those ninjas start hitting, we're going to drain our opponents very quickly with our high converted mana cost spells. But what are some of those other ways that we can get those high converted mana cost spells on top? Let's go through them now in tactic number 8, Spinning Top. First up, there's Select for Inspection, which has return target tap creature to its owner's hand, scry 1. So we can either use this defensively to get rid of one of our opponent's attacking creatures, or we can even bounce back one of our own creatures back to our hand. So basically we can go into combat, swing with our commander, bounce her back to our hand, scry 1, and then use her ninjutsu to get her back in play. Next up, we've got some more repeatable ways though with Darksteel Pendant and Crystal Ball. Darksteel Pendant is indestructible, and we can pay 1 to tap it to scry 1. And then we can pay 1 and tap Crystal Ball to scry 2. These are both great repeatable ways that we can ensure that we have high converted mana cost spells on top of our library. But we're also running some more powerful one-time effects with Brainstorm, Portent, and Telling Time. Brainstorm's going to let us draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from our hand on top of our library in any order. So if we've got a spell that has a high converted mana cost stuck in our hand, we can just put it back on top. And then Portent lets us look at the top 3 cards of our library, put them back in any order, and we can shuffle our library if we need to. On top of that, we get to draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So if we find what we're looking for in those 3 cards, we can keep them on top, or we can shuffle our library if we're looking for something better. And then Telling Time says, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand, 1 on top of your library, and 1 on the bottom. This card really gives us the best of both worlds by letting us pick and choose what goes where. We can put our best spell in our hand, the highest converted mana cost on top, and our worst card in the bottom. But what are some of those high converted mana cost spells that we've been talking about? Let's go through them now in tactic number 9, False Advertising. First up, there's the split card Far and Away. With it, we can return target creature to its owner's hand, make target player sacrifice a creature, or we can do both. The best part about a card like this is they have a converted mana cost equal to the total of both halves. So although both halves are very cheap for us to cast at 2 and 3 mana, the total converted mana cost is 5. So with our commander's trigger, if this is revealed, each of our opponents is going to lose 5 life. Now this kind of total converted mana cost scenario plays out with other cards, like Aftermath cards too. So we're also going to be running Consign to Oblivion. Consign has return target permanent to its owner's hand. And Oblivion has Aftermath, so we can cast it from our graveyard, and it says target opponent discards 2 cards. So although Consign is very cheap for us to cast at 2 mana, the total converted mana cost of this card is 7. Next up we have a split card with Discovery and Dispersal. Split cards are very similar to Fuse cards, but we can only cast one of the halves. Discovery says surveil 2, then draw a card. And Dispersal says each opponent returns a non-land permanent they control with the highest converted mana cost among permanents they control to its owner's hand, then discards a card. Again, Discovery may cost 2 and Dispersal may cost 5, but the total converted mana cost is 7. Next up is another split card with Spite and Malice. Spite is going to counter target non-creature spell, and Malice is going to destroy target non-black creature, and it can't be regenerated. Both halves cost 4, but the total converted mana cost is 8. Another split card that we're going to run is Connive and Concoct. Connive costs 4 and it says gain control of target creature with power 2 or less. And Concoct costs 5 and it says surveil 3, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So the total converted mana cost of this card is 9. Next up is Commit to Memory, which is another Aftermath card. Commit says put target spell or non-land permanent into its owner's library second from the top. And Memory is going to make each player shuffle their hand and graveyard into their library, then draw 7 cards. Commit costs 4 and Memory costs 6, but together they cost 10. And then there's Never to Return, which has a total converted mana cost of 7. Never says destroy target creature or planeswalker, and Return says exile target card from a graveyard, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. And our biggest converted mana cost spell is going to be Rags to Riches, which has a total converted mana cost of 11. Rags costs 4 and it says all creatures get -2/-2 until the end of the turn. And Riches costs 7 and it says each opponent chooses a creature he or she controls, you gain control of those creatures. Next up we're going to be running 2 Delve cards so we can exile cards from our graveyard to help pay for them. Treasure Cruise is going to cost 8 and it's going to draw us 3 cards. And Dig Through Time also costs 8 and it says look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And then we're running some cycling cards that we can just cycle away for value instead of actually having to cast them. Jesse and Zombies has Island Cycling or Swamp Cycling for 2. And River Serpent and Striped River Winder can both be cycled for a blue. Finally, there's Misdirection, which has a converted mana cost of 5, but we can actually cast it for free. It has you may exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay Misdirection's mana cost, and we can change the target of target spell with a single target. Every single card that we've gone over in this tactic is a great way to have a high converted mana cost card that really doesn't cost us that much. But now that we've gone through all those cards, let's talk about some utility cards that can help us get our ninjas back to our hand. So let's finish things off with tactic number 10, Hit and Run. First up, there's Familiar's Ruse, which says, as an additional cost to cast it, return a creature you control to its owner's hand, and it's going to counter target spell. So not only is this a very cheap and efficient counter spell, but it's also going to get one of our ninjas back to our hand. And then there's Aether Gale, which says return 6 target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. This is a very flexible card that lets us not only target some of our creatures, but it also lets us target our opponent's things too. Next up is Devastation Tide, which doesn't let us target, but it lets us return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. On top of that, it has a miracle cost for 1 and a blue, so there are times when we can cast it a lot cheaper. And it's a lot easier for our deck to build up our board, so we're going to be ahead of our opponents after we cast this. And finally, there's Karn's Temporal Sundering, which is a legendary sorcery, so we can only cast it if we control a legendary creature or planeswalker. It says target player takes an extra turn after this one, return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, exile Karn's Temporal Sundering. So not only do we get an extra turn, but we can also bounce back one of our ninjas back to our hand if we need to. Sometimes 1 extra turn is all we need to finish off all of our opponents at once. But now that we've gone through the cards that help us win with this deck, let's go through the cards that help make it happen. It's time to go on to the mana base. First up is Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which we can tap to sacrifice to search our library for base land and put into play tapped. And then there's Grixis Panorama, which can either tap for a colorless, or we can pay 1 to tap and sacrifice it to search for either an island or a swamp and put into play tapped. Next up is Warp Landscape, which can either tap for a colorless, or we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to search our library for base land and put into play tapped. And then there's Dimir Guildgate, Submerged Boneyard, Salt Marsh, Dismal Backwater, and Jawara Isle Refuge, each of which enter the battlefield tapped and tap for either a black or a blue mana. On top of that, Dismal Backwater and Jawara Isle Refuge will gain us 1 life when they come into play. Next up is Rogue's Passage, which can either tap for a colorless, or we can pay 4 to tap it to make target creature unblockable until the end of the turn. And then there's Halimar Depths, which enters the battlefield tapped and taps for a blue. But when it comes into play, we get to look at the top 3 cards of our library and then put them back in any order. Next, there's Alfira and Void, which when it enters the battlefield, we scry 1 and it can tap for a colorless. And then there's Isolated Watchtower, which can tap for a colorless, or we can pay 2 to tap it to scry 1, and then we can reveal the top card of our library. If it's a basic land, we get to put it onto the battlefield tapped, but we can only activate that ability if an opponent controls at least 2 more lands than us. And finally, we're running 22 basic lands, including 15 islands and 7 swamps. And now that we've gone through every single card in this deck, let's do a quick price check. A quick reminder that our deck costs are calculated using TCGPLAYER optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. The average Yuriko EDHREC deck is going to set you back $339.74, so let's say we compare to that. Our deck is going to be much more affordable, coming in at just $24.90. And just a quick reminder that our deck cost actually doesn't include our commander because it is a commander excluded episode. Again, Commander's Quarters decks are built to be tuned and focused within their budget, but there are always ways that we can improve on them. So let's go through some reasonable upgrades that you can add into the deck, and what I would take out for those cards too. Just a quick disclaimer before we get into this, these reasonable upgrades are going to be completely based off of my own perspective. When you're making choices on how to adjust your deck, you're taking your own playstyle and meta into account. So make sure that you factor that in when it comes to making your own decisions on what to swap in and what to swap out. Now that we're on the same page, let's go through how I personally would upgrade the deck. First up, we're going to be adding in Throat Slitter, which comes in at $3.16. It's a 2/2 rat ninja that costs 4 and a black. It has ninjutsu for 2 and a black, and when it deals combat damage to a player, we get to destroy target non-black creature that player controls. For Throat Slitter, we're going to be taking out Jehessian zombies. We need as many ninjas in this deck as we can get, so adding Throat Slitter is a no-brainer. At 3 mana, its ninjutsu isn't very costly, and its ability to destroy a creature can come in huge. Land cycling is great and all, but it doesn't provide us nearly as much value as Throat Slitter does. And then we're going to be adding in Haguri the Still Wind, which comes in at $2.73. It's a 3/4 human ninja that costs 3 blue. It has ninjutsu for 2 blue, and it says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may search your library for a ninja card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. If you do, shuffle your library. On top of that, it has pay 2, target ninja creature can't be blocked this turn. To add this card in, we're going to be taking out River Serpent. Haguri's effects can be extremely impactful with this deck. Being able to tutor for ninjas and make them unblockable are extremely powerful effects. These effects are much more impactful than just being able to cycle for a blue, so it's an easy decision to take River Serpent out. Next up, we're going to be upgrading our deck with Inkai's Servant of Oni, which comes in at $6.65. It's a 5/4 rat ninja that costs 5 black. It has ninjutsu for 3 black, and it says whenever Inkai's Servant of Oni deals combat damage to a player, you may put target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. On top of that, you can regenerate Inkai's for 1 and a black. So to put Inkai's in, we're going to be taking out Striped Riverwinder. Again, this is a very easy decision for us. Inkai's is an incredibly powerful ninja, so we're not going to lose any sleep when we take out Striped Riverwinder, which just cycles for a blue. And then we're going to be adding in Mystical Tutor, which comes in at $4.67. It's an instant that costs a blue, and it says search your library for an instant or sorcery card and reveal that card, shuffle your library, then put that card on top of it. To put Mystical Tutor in, we're going to be taking out Diabolic Tutor. Mystical Tutor is simply a better tutor for this deck. Not only can we search for something at instant speed and for only 1 mana, but we can also put it on top of our library. So right before our ninjas deal combat damage, we can just go get one of our highest converted mana cost cards and put it on top of our library, and then they're going to lose a ton of life. Diabolic Tutor is still a good card, but it does cost quite a bit more for us to cast, so it's an easy cut for us. Next up, we're going to be adding in Conspiracy, which comes in at $6.84. Conspiracy is an enchantment that costs 3 black. It says, as Conspiracy enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control are the chosen type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards that you own that aren't on the battlefield. To put Conspiracy in, we're going to be taking out Brain Spoil. Conspiracy is basically another arcane adaptation or xenograph for this deck, so it's going to be much better than Brain Spoil. Brain Spoil would just basically tutor for this card anyway, so it's just better that we have another effect like this. And finally, we're going to be adding in Temporal Trespass, which comes in at $3.47. It's a sorcery with Delve that costs 8 blue, and it says take an extra turn after this one, exile Temporal Trespass. To put this card in, we're going to be taking out Spite and Malice. Temporal Trespass is an incredibly powerful card with an extremely high converted mana cost, whereas Spite and Malice are a little overcosted for what they do. So in effect, we're putting in a better card that has a higher converted mana cost, which is an easy win for us. And with that, our show is coming to a close, but I really just want to hear about what you think about this deck, so why don't you let me know in the comments below. When you're buying decks like this one, or just individual cards, make sure you use that decklist link in the description below. Not only will you be getting great prices on TCGPLAYER, but you're also going to be supporting this show because they sponsor us. And make sure that you follow us on social media so you can get some early hints on who the next commander just might be. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel, and then check out some of our playlists on budget commander decks, commander excluded decks, and break the bank episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.